I never thought I'd see the day when my own children would look at me not as their mother, but as an obstacle standing in the way of their payday. For years, I believed I'd done right by them. I worked long shifts, kept a roof over their heads, and sacrificed my own dreams so they could chase theirs. This house, the one I'm sitting in right now as I tell you this story, wasn't just for walls and a roof. It was the place where first steps were taken, where birthdays were celebrated, where laughter and fights both echoed through the halls. It was the only thing left that truly felt like mine after a lifetime of giving. But then I overheard the kind of conversation no mother should ever hear. One night, thinking they were being clever, my daughter and son whispered in the kitchen, while I sat quietly in the living room. "We need to list it soon," my son said. "If we wait, the market could dip, and we'll lose money." My daughter chimed in. "She won't even notice. She barely keeps track of her checkbook anymore. We'll tell her it's for her own good. Maybe convince her the upkeep is too much." My heart stopped. First, I thought maybe I misheard. Maybe they were talking about something else. But as I sat there, frozen, I realized they weren't talking about some future investment. They were talking about selling my house, the very home I'd built for them. The shock was like a cold slap to the face. I wanted to storm in there, demand answers, scream, cry, anything. But instead, I stayed quiet, my pulse pounding in my ears, because in that moment, I understood something crucial. If my own flesh and blood were willing to plot behind my back, then confronting them too soon would only give them the upper hand. No, I couldn't let them know I knew. Not yet. They thought they were clever, thought they had already won. But they had no idea that the woman they were underestimating wasn't weak, wasn't fading, and certainly wasn't ready to be pushed aside. That night, sitting in my living room with the ghosts of their laughter still echoing in the walls, I made a decision. If they wanted war, they were going to get one, and this house, my house, would become the battlefield where I reminded my children exactly who they were dealing with. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life because I had to live under the same roof with them, pretending I didn't know what they were up to. Every smile they gave me felt fake, every hug felt rehearsed, and every question about my health or my finances sounded like they were sizing me up, checking how much longer they'd have to wait before they could cash me out. The worst part was that I wanted to believe there was some misunderstanding, that maybe I'd misheard. But that hope shattered when I stumbled across a folder left open on my daughter's laptop. Inside were real estate listings, spreadsheets, and even emails with an agent about listing her mother's property discreetly. My stomach turned. They weren't just talking, they were already in motion, already lining up buyers for a house I hadn't even agreed to sell. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed that night, my hands trembling, asking myself what I had done to deserve this kind of betrayal. I replayed the past like an old film, real Christmas mornings, scraped knees, late-night talks when they were teenagers. How did those children become these strangers who saw me as nothing but a dollar sign? My mind went dark places. For a while, I wondered if maybe they were right, maybe I was too old, maybe the house was too much for me, maybe I should just give it up. But then I looked around at the photographs on the wall, the scuffed floors from years of living, and the little notches in the doorway marking their heights as they grew up. This wasn't just a house, it was the history of my family, and I wasn't about to let them erase me from it. Still, I couldn't ignore the fear. What if they tried to trick me into signing something? What if they had me declared incompetent? I'd seen stories on the news about elders being pushed out of their homes by greedy family members. Was that going to be me? The thought of losing everything I worked for nearly broke me. But the more they lied, the more determined I became. They thought I was weak. They thought I was blind to their schemes. But I knew one thing for sure. If I let them get away with this, I'd lose not just my home but the last shred of respect I had for myself. And that was something I wasn't willing to surrender. The moment I realized what they were planning, the fear in me started to burn into something sharper: determination. If they wanted to play games, I'd play smarter. The first step was to get legal protection. Quietly, without telling them, I went down to the county office and spoke with a lawyer who specialized in elder rights. I told him everything, from the whispers I overheard to the emails I found. He didn't look shocked. He told me this kind of betrayal happened more often than people thought. That broke my heart a little, but it also gave me strength. Together, we drafted new documents: power of attorney, updated will, even a clause that specifically barred my children from making any decisions about my property without my direct, written consent. He also advised me to put the deed into a living trust with me as the sole trustee, meaning no one, not even my own kids, could touch this house unless I allowed it. I walked out of that office with papers in hand, feeling like I had just armed myself for battle. Next, I needed to gather evidence. If they were sneaky enough to try this once, they'd try again, and I wanted proof to shut them down hard. I bought a small voice recorder and kept it in my sweater pocket, catching every whisper, every phone call, every conversation where they thought I wasn't listening. Within weeks, I had a collection of audio files that would make anyone's jaw drop. My son bragging about how much money he'd get from the sale. My daughter laughing about putting me in a retirement community once the house was gone. Each recording was like a dagger in my chest, but it also fueled me. I wasn't just going to stop them, I was going to teach them a lesson they'd never forget. The final part of my plan was psychological. I started dropping subtle hints that I was confused, forgetful, maybe even slipping mentally. If they thought I was weak, they'd let their guard down, and that's exactly what I wanted. I acted like I misplaced my checkbook, like I couldn't remember where I left my keys, nodding along when they suggested maybe the house was too much for me. But behind the act, I was 10 steps ahead, tightening the net around them. My kids thought they were outsmarting me, but really, I was leading them straight into the trap. Asterisk, the more I played the part of the frail, confused old woman, the bolder my kids became. It was like watching vultures circle, thinking their prey was already dead. My son started bringing real estate brochures to the kitchen table, sliding them across as if he was doing me a favor. Look, Mom, this condo is perfect for you. No stairs, no yard work, you'd be safer there. My daughter chimed in with her fake sweet tone. And think about how lonely this house must feel now that it's just you. Don't you think it's time for a change? Every word felt like poison, but I nodded and smiled, acting like maybe they were right. What they didn't know was that every conversation was being recorded. Every document they waved under my nose was photographed. Every sneaky attempt at manipulation was being logged. They even tried to slip papers in front of Nathan, innocent-looking forms they claimed were just to update the insurance or permission for maintenance work. But I'd been coached by my lawyer. I never signed a thing, and when I pretended I was about to, I caught their eyes glinting with greed like kids on Christmas morning. That's when I knew for sure they weren't just hoping to sell my house, they were counting on it. Meanwhile, I started making quiet moves of my own. I reached out to close friends and neighbors, letting them in on the situation. I wanted witnesses, people who could back me up if things turned ugly. My neighbor George, a retired cop, offered to help me any way he could. You just say the word, and I'll make sure they regret ever trying this, he said with a firmness that gave me comfort. My support system was small, but it was loyal, and I knew I wasn't as alone as my kids wanted me to feel. But the final straw came one Saturday afternoon. I overheard them on the phone with a real estate agent, setting up a private showing for buyers to come walk through my home while I was still living in it. That was the moment the fear burned away completely, leaving only fire in its place. They thought they were days away from stealing my house, but what they didn't realize was that I was already setting the stage for their downfall. They wanted to sell my house. Fine. I was going to sell them out first. The day of that so-called private showing, I let them think everything was going according to plan. I acted confused when they told me to stay in my bedroom while some friends came by to look at the house. I nodded politely, even offering to make tea, as if I didn't know what was happening right under my nose. But inside, my blood was boiling. My lawyer and I had already prepared everything, copies of the trust documents, my will, and the recordings I'd gathered, and to make sure there were no excuses later, I invited George, my retired cop neighbor, to come over that same afternoon. When the real estate agent and two strangers walked through the front door, marveling at my home as though it was already on the market, I stepped out of my room and into the living room. My kids froze. My daughter stammered, "Mom, we didn't want to overwhelm you with the details. This is just a casual visit." I held up a small recorder and pressed play. The sound of their own voices filled the room. Crystal clear. My son bragging about selling the house behind my back. My daughter laughing about how I wouldn't even realize until it was too late. The agent's face turned white. The buyers exchanged awkward glances, and my kids looked like deer caught in headlights. George stepped forward, his arms crossed, and said calmly, You two better have a good explanation, because what I'm hearing sounds like fraud. My son tried to bluster his way through it, but I cut him off, my voice steady for the first time in weeks. You think I'm senile, you think I don't know what's happening, but I know everything, and I promise, if you keep pushing me, you're going to regret it. I laid out the documents on the coffee table, one by one, the trust deed, the power of attorney, the will that excluded them entirely. This house is mine, I said, looking them each in the eye. You can't sell it, you can't touch it, and if you try to force me again, you'll be hearing from my lawyer and maybe even the police. The room was dead silent except for the sound of the buyers awkwardly excusing themselves and heading for the door. My kids had just been exposed in front of strangers, and for the first time, the power shifted. The fear they thought they'd planted in me was gone. Now it was their turn to feel it. After that confrontation, you'd think my kids would have backed off, maybe even apologized. But instead, their masks slipped completely, and what came out was uglier than I could have imagined. My son exploded, shouting about how selfish I was, how I didn't need a big house at my age, and how he and his sister were just trying to be practical. My daughter cried crocodile tears, insisting that everything they'd done was for my own good, even though the evidence was right there on the recorder. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply told them to leave my house until they could learn how to respect me. They stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frames rattled, but I didn't flinch. That night, I sat down with my lawyer again and took the final steps to make sure their claws could never reach my life again. Together, we filed a restraining order to prevent them from attempting any legal tricks without my knowledge, and we submitted copies of my recordings and documents to a safe deposit box and to George, just in case anything happened to me. I wasn't taking any chances. The emotional part, though that was harder. Lying in bed, I kept hearing their voices in my head. Not the recordings, but the way they used to sound when they were kids. I remembered my son asking me to tuck him in after a nightmare, my daughter running into my arms after her first heartbreak. Those memories hurt worse than the betrayal, because it was proof that once they had been innocent, once they had loved me without conditions. Now, they saw me as nothing more than an obstacle. Still, I refused to let that pain weaken me. Instead, I channeled it into resolve. Every phone call they made, trying to reason with me, went unanswered. Every knock on the door was ignored. I even blocked their numbers. If they wanted access to me, it was going to be on my terms, not theirs. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of control over my own life. It was lonely, yes, but it was also freeing. They thought they could break me by taking my house, but all they did was awaken the fighter in me. And now, I was more determined than ever to show them just how badly they'd underestimated their own mother. Cutting them off should have ended it, but greed has a way of making people reckless. Within weeks, the letters started coming, the envelopes slipped under my door, messages left in the mailbox, all full of excuses and manipulations. "Mom, we're sorry, we didn't mean it that way," one read, though it was followed by a not-so-subtle line about how I should reconsider what's best for everyone. Another was nastier. "If you cared about your family, you'd think about how much good that money could do, instead of wasting it on yourself." I shredded every single one. Then came the visits. They'd show up unannounced, pounding on the door, shouting through the glass that I was being unfair. Neighbors heard them yelling and shook their heads. Their reputations were unraveling, and I let it happen. I knew if I kept calm, the truth would paint itself, but I didn't stop there. Remember those recordings I'd made? I decided it was time they saw the light of day. With my lawyer's help, I sent copies to a few key family members and even to the homeowners association that my kids were part of. Suddenly, their dirty little scheme wasn't just between us, it was public. People they respected, people whose opinions mattered to them, now knew they'd tried to scam their own mother out of her home. The fallout was immediate. My son's co-workers heard about it, and whispers spread. My daughter's PTA friends gave her the cold shoulder. They called me in fury, screaming that I'd humiliated them. But humiliation was exactly the point. They wanted to strip me of dignity, of stability, of everything I worked for. Instead, I stripped them of their shiny facades. And just when they thought it couldn't get worse, I made my coldest move yet. I went back to my lawyer and rewrote my will again, this time not only cutting them out, but leaving everything to charities. local shelters, and a scholarship fund in my name. I made sure word got around to if they thought they'd ever see a penny from me, they were dead wrong. My house, my savings, my legacy, it would all go to people who actually deserved it. Watching their faces when they realized they'd lost everything before I was even gone. That was a kind of justice I wouldn't trade for anything. It didn't take long for the cracks in their lives to widen into full-blown collapses. My son lost his job. First word about his stunt with me had traveled through his office like wildfire. Nobody wanted to work with a man who would trick his own mother for money. He tried to spin it, claiming I was senile, that I didn't know what I was doing. But the documents and recordings I'd circulated made him look like the liar he was. My daughter fared no better. Parents in her community whispered about her betrayal at bake sales and school meetings. The PTA board quietly pushed her out, embarrassed to be associated with someone so publicly disgraced. Their friends, the ones they'd spent years trying to impress, started ghosting them. Invitations dried up. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid them. For two people who thrived on appearances, it was social death. And me, for the first time in years, I walked through my house without fear, without tension gripping my chest. I planted new flowers in the garden. I baked pies for the neighbors who had supported me. I even started volunteering at the library, where the younger kids called me Grandma Ruth and hugged me like I was their own. Life began to feel full again, and I realized something. I didn't need my children's approval, their visits, or even their love. What I needed was respect. If they couldn't give it, then I could build a life where I didn't need them at all. Sure, late at night, I sometimes caught myself wondering how everything had come to this. No parent dreams of cutting off their own children. But then I'd remember the look in their eyes when they thought they had me cornered, like I was just a stepping stone in their climb to comfort. That memory hardened me. I knew I had done the right thing. And the sweeter part, every single day, they had to live with the knowledge that the home they once tried to steal from me was thriving in my hands, and they'd never touch it again. Their collapse wasn't my revenge, was simply the consequence of their own choices. Asterisk. As the months rolled into a year, the dust finally settled, but the scars remained. My children rarely called anymore, and when they did, it wasn't out of love, it was out of desperation. I answered once, just to hear what they'd say. My son's voice was strained, brittle, like a man who'd lost more than he'd gained. He muttered about bad luck, about how people misunderstood him. But I cut him off with a quiet truth. You did this to yourself. My daughter tried to play the victim, crying about being ostracized by her friends, but I had no sympathy left. I told her I'd warned them both, and they chose greed over family. Hanging up, I felt lighter, like I'd finally closed the book on their betrayal. Meanwhile, my life blossomed in ways they could never have imagined. The scholarship fund I started was helping kids in my town go to college. The shelters I supported wrote me letters filled with gratitude. People who barely knew me showed more genuine care than my own children ever had. And every time I walked past the framed copy of my trust on the wall, I smiled. That house, the one they thought they'd tricked me out of, was still mine, full of warmth, laughter, and freedom. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had tried to erase me, to push me into the shadows of some nursing home, or worse. But instead, they'd written themselves out of my story entirely. My last laugh wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about survival. About choosing myself when the people I loved most tried to tear me down. And the sweetest part, knowing that long after I was gone, my legacy wouldn't be their inheritance, their fancy cars, or their greed-fueled dreams. It would be the good I left behind, the people I helped, and the strength I found in myself. So yes, they tried to sell my house. They thought they were clever, that I'd be powerless, but I outsmarted them, every step of the way. And as I sit here on my porch, sipping tea, watching the sun dip behind the same home they thought they'd steal, I can't help but laugh, soft, steady, and victorious. Because in the end, it wasn't just my house I saved. It was me.